So yeah, welcome along. I'm David Smith from Arrow. So somebody's just saying they can't wave. So hi all. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. It's another Commvault webinar Wednesday. It's the second one of this series that we've done. We've got a few more coming up. There's one in November. Sorry, there's one in October. I'm getting my months wrong. October, November, and December. So we've got 3 more to go, and then this one as well. So yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Marc Lucas. Marc, if you could just go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So if you're an attendee, by default, you are muted. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, though. So any questions that you've got, you should have a sort of somewhere at the top of your toolbar there within Teams. There should be a little Q&A button. It certainly looks like that on mine here. So any questions that you've got, submit those into that Q&A box, and we will have a Q&A session towards the end as well. As it says there, this is being recorded. We are going to actually make this live this live session we're going to put up onto our YouTube channel hopefully later on today, so you will be able to watch it back again as well and share that with all your colleagues too. And then post webinar, any questions, you can reach out to Joel Taylor, who's my colleague here from Arrow on the team. He's also on this webinar, and you can get hold of Joel there. That's the email address there. Bless you, whoever that was. I'm going to hand it straight over to you, Marc, and put myself on mute as well. So over to you, Marc Lucas from Commvault.
Fantastic, thanks, David. And obviously, yeah, Joel is definitely going to be your throat to choke initially, but you can also reach out to Commvault Direct. I know most of in fact, I know all of the people on the call anyway. So yeah, more than happy to have any questions that you've got after this, then don't hesitate to reach out. And as well as Joel, as well as David giving us support, we have also got Gary Milner. Now, Gary Milner is the technical expert for Commvault at Arrow. So, Gary, I don't know if you want to take yourself off mute.
Yep, can do. Good morning, everybody. I know.
Yeah,
I do know
there we go.
The people on the call. But for those that don't, yeah, as you know, Marc has explained, I'm a Commvault technical champion within Arrow. So if there's anything I can do to help in and around Commvault, don't hesitate to reach out to me. It's just gary.milner@arrow.com, because unfortunately I'm not on the Commvault ECS UK email address.
Fantastic, thanks, Gary. And obviously we've actually got 2 technical champions on the call as well. So we have Gary from Arrow. We also have Lara here from Proact as well. So welcome to the Tech Champs. And last but by no means least, we also have Jose on the call as well. So, Jose, would you like to take yourself off mute and just introduce yourself to the crowd?
Of course. So yeah, name is Jose. I work here at Commvault as a sales engineer, which means I usually talk with customers, helping them, with their requirements, showing them the capabilities of our products, and guiding them through the proof of concept stage and everything, and basically making sure that we have the right tools to meet the requirements. And I have a lot of experience working with AD and Entra ID, so hopefully I can be of some use here and help you guys. So yeah, pleased to meet you all.
Fantastic, thanks. I think Jose, you're underselling yourself, mate. I know you're a real expert on there, so you're going to be invaluable on this call. And Jose is going to do a bit of a demo around Active Directory and Entra ID a little bit later. So I think let's go straight into, and this is a very snappy title. This title does exactly what it says on the tin. This is what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to focus predominantly on Active Directory and Entra ID and what we do that makes that protection unique as well. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But very much, Active Directory and Entra ID are the keys to your customer's kingdom. And as you've seen with recent ransomware attacks in the UK, it tends to be Active Directory tends to be the thing that customers break to say, okay, we need to stop rebuild it afterwards. And very much with what we do around Active Directory from a forest level recovery, and then all the other factors that I'll touch on later on, we do have a very unique offering. So 3 things I'm going to touch on. A very quick recap on the last webinar Wednesday. So for anybody that missed that, it is available. If you go to search for Arrow Webinar Wednesdays, you'll be able to access the on-demand version of it. Plus, this one will also be available for you on demand, that you can share internally as well. If you need us to talk about what we're going to talk about to your customers, then please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll be more than happy to help you with that. Then we'll delve into, okay, well, why is Active Directory and Entra ID so important? And then what it is that we do that is unique through that single pane of glass. Okay, so this is one of the slides we talked about in the last session, and I know that for most of the people on the call, you've seen this before. However, there was an event that I did with Arrow yesterday, and although your customers know this, it's what are they doing about it? What plans have they put in place to recover? And it's the same as at the event yesterday when I mentioned Marks and Spencer's. You could see people inwardly groan, oh, God's sake, do not talk about Marks and Spencer's. However, you're going to get the same from your customers, and it's the next question that comes from your lips should be, okay, well, what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen to you? What plans have you put into place? Because we don't want you taking 24 days to recover. And in fact, M&S, it took them 46 days to get their online clothing business back online. And it can take them months to get absolutely everything back online. So minimum viable company, this is, and again, at the event yesterday, when I said, is anyone talking to their customers about minimum viability? No one was talking about it. But at the end, it was like, okay, yeah, this is a concept that's very easy, very effective to talk about. It's thinking about, okay, this is my core business. This is what I absolutely have to recover if we have a disaster or we have a ransomware attack. Everything else falls to the side. This is what we need to recover after an attack. And it's about people, processes, and technology. 100%. If you don't get all 3 of those right, the plan will fail. And I think there's a use case that I talked about last time, and I think Gary, I've got Gary to thank about this, and that was Knights of Old. It was a logistics company, and because of a weak password, so this is where the people and the processes definitely fell down, hackers were able to get in and they destroyed a company, and all 700 people working at Knights of Old lost their jobs. That's what we definitely do not want for your customers. So we talked about this in the last session around this is I would say, very, very simple, but also very easy to get wrong. And I mentioned before about identifying the core of your business, thinking about that cyber recovery is completely different to backup and disaster recovery. What are the elements that we need to think about? Having a plan that you know works, and testing it. And if you can automate as much as you can, then even better. And what we're going to talk about with Active Directory and the forest level recovery definitely does that. And then, okay, well, as well as having a plan to make sure we can effectively recover, with remediating and securing, what else do we need to think about? How can we be proactive? How can we put something in the production environment that's going to help pick up a suspect attack much earlier? And then again, people, processes, and the technology, it's making sure you've got the right software and storage and anything else, security tools that you need in your environment to make sure you're thinking about things like clean room, immutability, encryption, and so on and so on. And that flexibility of being able to move your data where you want to move it. And one of the last things that we talked about in the last session was, okay, well, how can Commvault help? And you can see here we have a plethora of solutions to help customers tick the box from minimum viability from a data perspective. They need to make sure they bring the rest of the technology, the people and the processes as well. And that's where you would come in, that you would help them with that as well. But what we're going to talk about today is identity recovery. It is one of the first things that you need to think about, your customers need to think about. It's, okay, we've had an attack, we've potentially broken our Active Directory to make sure that no one else can access it, we've shut it down. Now we need to think about recovery. How can we do that effectively? And how can we do that as quickly as possible? So yes, we can also help with all the other stuff. And we are going to do sessions for the remaining webinar Wednesdays on Clean Room and on, in fact, we did a session yesterday, a live session on Cloud Rewind. We'll be doing a virtual session around that later on. Okay, so let's get to the meat of the bone then. Why is protecting Active Directory and Entra ID so important? It is because it is massively exposed. When you look at how many attacks involve trying to get into Active Directory, first of all as a point of entry to then do their reconnaissance and the lateral movement, but also most ransomware attacks will then potentially think about destroying Active Directory to cause as much chaos as possible. That first start, again, that's brand new, that's fresh from a GigaOn report, and I would definitely recommend accessing this, downloading the report, sharing it with your customers, get the word out there that the situation in the UK is actually worse than the rest of the world. Only 7% of people in that survey said we've never had a major incident. So 90% of attacks will focus on Active Directory as well, which is not great because it holds the keys to everything. And it can take days or weeks to recover from an attack regarding Active Directory and Entra ID as well. You do not want that. You want to be able to recover as quickly as possible. There was a recent customer-facing webinar on Active Directory and Entra ID, and specifically around forest level recovery. And there was a customer there, they had 8 domains that were connected under a single forest, and it took them 33 hours to bring everything back. And that is just really, 33 hours is a huge amount of time. And a lot of your customers do not have an automated recovery solution for Active Directory. So they will be in box A, where they have to follow the Microsoft official forest level recovery guide and follow those painfully slow steps, and it's not automated at all. Okay, so just a quick recap. Again, I think everybody on this call knows what Active Directory is. It's been around for 25 years around identity access management. It's still used by a huge amount of customers out there. It's probably going to be around for at least another 10 to 15 years as well. And then Azure AD, which has recently been rebranded as Entra ID, basically does the same as Active Directory, but it focuses on cloud and SaaS environments. So it's very likely, you can see there the sheer number of customers out there that have Active Directory. Not many of them are using backup. So this is why this is a real sweet spot and a great conversation starter around minimum viability. So why do this should be pretty obvious, obviously, that some customers are going to have both, because we're living in that hybrid world now. And if they're living in the hybrid world of having stuff on-prem and in the cloud or SaaS, they're going to need both Active Directory for what they're doing on-prem, but also for cloud and SaaS as well. And it's all very much Entra is about identity synchronization. We will share these slides with everybody as well, but very much it's about holding the keys to the kingdom. Without Active Directory working, I think the analogy that myself and one of my colleagues used, it's a bit like going into work in the morning. You put your swipe card in to go into the to where you work, and it doesn't work. That's what Active Directory does. So when it stops, everything stops. So that is the alternative header for me. You know me, I like to be dramatic. When it goes down, nothing works at all. And it's very much like having a virtual bouncer on the door for Active Directory for on-prem and Entra ID for cloud and SaaS as well. You need to get past, you need to be able to log in with the right credentials. And you know that when you log in, it's not just giving you access to the network, it's also making sure that ideally what you're accessing, and again, this is where people and processes coming in, that you're not going to give access to absolutely everything within your company, that everybody within that company can then go ahead and start poking around in. You'll only give them access to what they actually need for their job. But it is also a very, very easy way for businesses, for ransomware gangs to be able to gain access and then lateral movement through your customer's network. Okay, so thinking about what happens when your customer's looking at Active Directory backup. Obviously, they've got the choice of of our competitors. They have the choice of going for the native Active Directory tools, recovery tools that are available. What they really need is that fast, granular recovery, and being able to use that for both Active Directory and Entra ID. And when you start looking at the solutions that are out there, it's very difficult to find one that does both Active Directory and Entra ID together. We're one of them that does that. And I think it's us. I can't remember the name of the other vendor that does it as well. But it's very, it starts to really dwindle down. The second thing that they need, and it's absolutely imperative that they have this from a recovery, from a cyber recovery, disaster recovery perspective, is that automated forest recovery. We're going to delve into what that means, but it means, yes, granular recovery is important, but you also need to think from a recovery perspective, how quickly can we bring back absolutely everything that we have under an entire forest? And it's not just going to be bringing back Active Directory data, it's also going to be bringing back the infrastructure around that. And when you follow the Active Directory Forest Recovery Guide from Microsoft, and I'm sure all of you are, you know this anyway, but I've included a link there. Depending on how complex the environment is for your customer, it can take up to 100 manual steps. That's why, for example, that customer that I mentioned earlier, it took them 33 hours. I've known businesses where it's taken them almost a week and beyond. And that's a situation they definitely want to avoid. The other thing as well is that when you're looking at the data that you want to recover, being able to compare what you have in your environment. So let's say, for example, your last backup to what's currently in your environment, or comparing one backup to another, and having that ability to do that comparison becomes incredibly important when you're looking at, okay, well, this does not look right. We're not going to recover from this version of the backup or what's in the current environment. We can use this instead. And again, having that ability to be able to do both, you'll find that when you start, I want fast granular recovery for both Active Directory and Entra ID. I want that automated forest recovery. I want to be able to do the comparisons. It starts really dwindling down as to what their options are. And why are your customers, why do they need these three things? And it's very much to make sure that they're reducing their downtime. And as a result of that, it's really not impacting on their bottom line as well. Having a single solution that automates forest level recovery, for example, is going to help seriously reduce your operational and recovery costs as well. And for me, this active, I know we talked about minimum viability in the last session, and one of the things I mentioned at the end is minimum viability is the first part of the conversation for being completely cyber resilient. Well, for me, one of the first things that your customers will definitely need to look at from a minimum viability perspective is Active Directory forest level recovery. It makes their business stronger. But again, test. Okay, so what is it that we do that's unique? And it's very much that, again, I mentioned that it's not just us that does Active Directory and Entra ID, but that list is very, very small anyway. However, when you start adding up, you start putting together that tick list of one solution that does, a single solution that does Active Directory and Entra ID, has that granular recovery, and also has that automated forest level recovery in a single pane of glass, and then offers the best data coverage outside of Active Directory. It makes us very, very, very unique. So I would say that this isn't really a slide that you're going to need to go through, that you know what a forest is. It's just making sure that your customers understand it. So making sure they appreciate that they'll have different domains within their company, but what they more than likely have done is they would have grouped similar domains together that share a huge commonality under what's called an Active Directory forest. And it's being able to bring back things at a forest level recovery very, very quickly that becomes very, very important. So what you're seeing there on the right hand side, and I know that when Jose goes through his demo, he may well touch on this as well, is that you'll be able to, when you do that automated forest level recovery, it will also map out and give you a visual topology of what we are protecting in that Active Directory forest level recovery. We will go in first of all, and we will map out that environment. The next stage, once that's been mapped out, is to then look at, okay, well, how do we automate those steps? So it's incredibly important for your customer to make sure they've done that initial automation. But then once they've done that, and obviously filling out the steps and the specific steps that are relevant for their environment as well, and putting the relevant information about their environment. But once they've done that, then they can press the big red button, and then it's automated, and the recovery will be much, much faster. So in the example I mentioned earlier, where we had a customer where it took them 33 hours to recover 8 domains under a single forest. This gives you this is more around the interactive topology that you can see there. When Dan, and again, I really recommend, if you haven't listened to that webinar, and it is available on demand, and I give you a link to it as well, that what Dan did from Commvault is he was able to do a forest level recovery. Yes, he might have whizzed through a few of the steps. It took him 2.5 to 3 hours. That is significantly faster. So once that run book has been built and automated, then again, press the big red button. So there are 2 additions that we have. We have the Active Directory Standard Edition, and it is worth calling out, you do have Active Directory Forest Recovery with the Standard Edition. However, it will mean going through that manual guide that I referred to earlier from Microsoft. I would suggest that what your customer really needs, and it is worth paying the extra for, is the Enterprise Edition that does everything that you can see there that the Standard Edition does, but it also gives you that forest level automated forest recovery and that visual topology as well, and orchestrating up to 100 steps, but so that customer doesn't have to follow that guide anymore. And once that's set up, how easy is it going to be for them to carry out DR testing on their forest level recovery? It's going to be so much easier. It's worth calling out that our solution has Active Directory and Entra ID in a single solution, single pane of glass. So with Entra ID, the storage is included as well. With Active Directory, the storage is very much to your customer. They can bring their own storage, and that storage can either be on-prem or it can be, for example, in Azure. And Active Directory very much is part of the family that we have. And this is the Commvault Cloud SaaS family that concentrates on, basically, this is all as a service solutions that you can see here that we have available. So it's not Active Directory, it's Microsoft 365, it's on-prem, it's VMs, containers. So this is what I'm talking about, that having that solution that has automated Active Directory forest level recovery. And again, when you get this, you can click on here and you can see a pre-recorded short video on how that works. And then everything else that I touched on before, that hybrid AD and Entra ID support, fast granular recovery, being able to do your recovery testing, to carry out that interactive comparison, and also to protect absolutely everything. They just need to unlock the ability through licensing outside of Active Directory as well. So when you take into account those 6 things available for a single platform, only Commvault can provide them with that. There's a great use case on there as well. And this is a great microsite that we've recently launched, and a fantastic ebook. And all of these are resources that you can share with your customer. And that webinar that I mentioned is 33 minutes long. I highly recommend that you watch it because it goes through Active Directory forest level recovery as well. Right, that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over the reins to Jose, and I'm going to turn off my camera and put myself on mute. Can't see any questions at the moment. But again, if you do have any questions, I'll keep an eye out. And I will interrupt Jose and say, okay, mate, it's up to you. Right, so Jose, mate, over to you.
Perfect, thanks. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So this is the Commvault Cloud Console. I assume most of you are already familiar with this. If not, this is just basically the service catalog. This is where every single workload that we have can be configured. So if you want to back up your virtual machines, your Office 365, Active Directory, of course, just do it here, right? So of course, we are going to focus on Active Directory. So just want to show really quickly how the configuration is done, because Marc mentioned this before, and it is actually true that, for example, for Entra ID, you can be up and running within 5 minutes, probably even just 1 minute, right? So it's really, really simple to configure. So if I click configure here, you will be given 3 different options. Azure ID or Entra ID, right? This is the cloud version, Active Directory Granular Recovery, and Active Directory Forest Recovery. This Forest one is the enterprise version that Marc mentioned, and the Granular one is the standard version, right? So for Entra ID, you only really have like 3 different steps. The first one is to choose where do you want Commvault to provision the storage for these those backups, right? Just like Marc mentioned before, for Entra ID, we actually include the storage for free. And this is immutable storage provision in the cloud by us. So you only need to tell us where. This is a demo. This is not a production environment, so I can only pick the US, but in a real environment, it could be anywhere you want. In this case, it could be in the UK, for example, right? And then the next step is just to give it a name, right? Anything. And then you just sign in with your global administrator to assign the permissions to our application to back up your data. Now, we don't use that global administrator to back up anything. We just use the global administrator to assign the permissions to this application, right? Which is basically following the security best practices. And these are the permissions that we need. And you just click accept. I'm not going to do that because I already have this Entra ID being backup, right? But the next step is just clicking create, and that's it, right? That's why I say you can be up and running within 1 minute. Now you will see this little screen where it tells you which environments are being backed up. This one is not being backed up right now because this Entra ID, I just created it for a test, right? And then I deleted it. But in a real production environment, you will see this calendar here, and you will have one recovery point every single day since the moment you onboarded the solution, basically forever, right? So I only have one backup on the 26th of July, 2024, which is when I created this environment only for this one single backup. But again, in a production environment, this is going to take a backup every single day, right? So now I'm going to click restore, and this is basically what I can restore. I can restore my users. So if I click here, I will see all of my users. You can search if you want, of course, right? You can also recover the roles and the groups. And it's really important to mention that we also recover the relationship between the three. So which roles are assigned to which users are assigned to which groups, which roles are assigned to which groups, and so on, which is really important because those relationships can get a little bit complicated, right? We also recover your conditional access policies, and not every single customer is making a lot of use for these policies, but the most of the customers should, right? Because the conditional access policies are really important. This will handle things like your multi-factor authentication, right? So, and there is no recycle bin or anything like that built in the Microsoft portal or the Microsoft Entra ID solution. If you lose one of those conditional policies, it's basically gone. And one of those conditional policies could be the multi-factor authentication for your entire company. So those could be really important, right? We also have the applications. So these applications will basically control how to log in into your applications, right? So how the single sign-on works, the multi-factor, and so on, right? So if you lose these applications, your real application will still exist. So you will have your human resources application, your VPN application, but you won't be able to log into those, right? So this is also really important that you are able to recover this really quickly. Over time, these enterprise applications and these conditional access policies tend to grow. No customer really tends to delete those over time. So if you have a kind of big company, you will have thousands of these items, right? So having a backup of those is really important because recreating those manually could take weeks already, right? So hopefully that makes sense. If I were to show the on-premises Active Directory, it is really similar, but you have some extra steps, right? Because you need to configure that storage that Marc mentioned, because we only include the storage for Entra ID because it's already in the cloud. So it's really easy for us to also provision some storage in the cloud. But because this one is on premises in your network, you need to provision some storage in your network, right? And also we need to install an agent inside the domain controller, right? So this process is not 1 minute, but it should be 15, 20 minutes. And then we have forest recovery. Let me change to a different environment because I have a different environment just for the forest recovery, right? And for the on-premises ID, right? So I have this on-premises ID, right? You also have the same calendar, same everything. And if you click restore, you will see the same options. This is the standard one, not the enterprise. So this is just for one single domain controller. And you will see here everything that is inside your domain controller, just like I showed you before for Entra ID. So you have your computers, your users, your GPOs. This is folder is also backup. So basically, all of the objects and items inside your domain controller. Right? And this is also granular. You can also search and recover just what you need. Right? So both the Entra ID that I showed you before and this one are included with that standard license. If now we move into the forest one, right? This is the enterprise version that Marc mentioned before. So this one is slightly different, right? Because in here, we are not just recovering one domain controller, right? We are recovering a whole forest. And this could be hundreds of domain controllers, right? So if I expand this, in this case, this is just a demo, right? So we have two different domains. It's that little blue triangle right here. And we have three different domain controllers, two domain controllers for this domain and one for this child domain, because this domain depends on the one at the top. So this is basically going to first discover all of your domain controller structure or hierarchy and show it here, right? So this is already really nice to have because, again, I only have three domains, three domain controllers. In a real environment, you could have hundreds. So this could get a little bit complicated. And you can see basically the configuration that you have for every single one of them. You can click properties. You can see the feasible roles. The feasible roles basically define the role or the services that are provided by each domain controller. And this is important because if you don't recover this, well, some services and basically the way Active Directory works at the first level, it basically needs those feasible roles, right? So then, and this is important part, right? We have the runbook, right? So for the runbook, this is basically what Marc also showed in the slide, but let me show you here in a little bit more detail. We have multiple phases. So those 100 steps that Marc mentioned before are in here, right? I can basically expand this and see each single step one by one. And you have the freedom to skip or pause after any step. Now, this looks complicated, right? But let me clarify this. If we were to show these steps for any other backup or any other restore, like, for example, your SQL VM, right? It will also look something like this, right? But we don't do it because it's not needed, right? You don't need to know every single step that goes through a SQL restore. Just click restore and we restore your SQL VM, right? That's fine. But in this case, it's different, right? Because AD is a complex product, right? And there could be many specific configurations that you have, third-party integrations, and so on. So it might be needed to actually skip some steps or do some steps manually or stop after one of the steps because you actually want to do and check something. So we are just giving you more freedom. In most cases, you don't really need to modify this. So even though it looks a little bit complicated, it's not, right? It's just giving you more.
It's worth calling out as well, Jose, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
that for some customers, it could be that the first 50 steps is going to be all that they need. So that not every single customer is going to have to go all the way through 80 to 100 steps. It depends on how complex their environment is.
Exactly. Yes, and there are many steps that are really critical, like configuring the DNS on your disease. If you don't configure the DNS, nothing is going to work. But then there are also some ones like force replication, which are not really needed, right? This specific one is going to make your restore faster, but maybe you don't need to do that, right? So again, it's highly customizable, right? So it's up to every single customer, right? But basically what this is going to do, in short, is for every single domain and child domain and subdomain, is going to restore at least one domain controller. So all of your different domains are up and running, and you can get to that minimum viable company where at least something, well, not something, everything is working, right? Now, you can also select how many domain controllers you want, if you want to recover the whole infrastructure or just the minimum viable. If you have hundreds of domain controller, it will make sense to recover only the minimum necessary, right? Because it's going to take really long if you want to recover 200 VMs. If you only have like 10 or 20, it probably makes sense to just recover everything. But this is going to basically give you the different options that you have, right? So let me use this model, it's easier to read. So basically, you have two main ways to recover. One is basically the production recovery, where you actually lost your forest and you want to recover everything. And then you have the non-production. This basically is I recover to an isolated network just to test how this works and to test if I have any specific issues that I need to solve, or basically to be ready when this actually is needed in a production environment. It's really important that this is on a isolated network, if you do a test restore on your production network, it's going to override your other domain controllers because domain controllers replicate between each other. So you don't want to do it. That's why we give you actually two completely different options to guide you through the right process so you don't make any mistakes, really. That's why. That's why, really. If you click here, it's going to tell you, please ensure that the network you restore is completely isolated. Everything that I just told you, right? So it's really simple to use, even though AD is a complex thing, right? We try to make it really simple. And then in here, you choose which ones you want to recover. Again, I don't need to recover every single domain controller for every single domain. I could just recover one for each domain, and that's fine, right? It depends on my specific requirements, right? So I go through all of this process. I don't want to show you everything, but basically what this does is it's going to ask me for the domain credential for my domain controllers, and it's going to ask me how do I want to recover the domain controller. Is that by I, as a customer, create a new VM that is empty, and Commvault is going to promote that empty VM into a domain controller? Or do you want Commvault to create the new VM for me, right? With a backup of the domain controller, right? Those are the two different options that we have. The second one is basically we take a backup of the domain controller, not only the domain controller inside the VM, but also the VM itself. So we can recreate the entire server with all of the configurations that you have there, and then also the domain controller, which is basically going to create all the domain controllers from scratch, right? That is the usual option, but for testing and so on, maybe you want to promote the new server. It's really up to you, right? And that's pretty much it. Then in the last step, you can configure those runbook steps and choose if you want to skip any of them, as we mentioned before. And that's it, right? You click next, and this should be, it depends on how many servers you want to create, of course, but it should be between 1-2 hours usually, which is much faster than a real environment. Marc mentioned those 33 hours. I will say that is a customer that is not so big. If you have a customer with hundreds of domain controllers, it could take them weeks to recover. It's not simple at all, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we're just on time, so yeah.
That was, A, that was spot on, and B, that was absolutely on time. That's really appreciated. So I would imagine for those who are on this call, if you want to share this recording, then please share this recording, and it's going to be posted onto the Arrow Webinar Wednesday site as soon as possible. So let me just quickly show you that particular Webinar Wednesday's one. So there's the first session where we talked about minimum viability and why Commvault is different. That's where the recording will be for today's session. The next session that we're going to go through is focusing on Air Gap Protect. Then you've got Clean Room Recovery on the 12th of November. And then the last session, early Christmas present, is where we're going to talk about Cloud Rewind. So just very briefly, hopefully you can see why we've chosen the solutions that we've chosen, because they very much fit into the solutions that your customers are going to need to think about for achieving minimum viability. And for me, that's also a great opportunity to talk to them about any professional services that you have with Active Directory. If they've got an experienced AD team or someone that's done that forest level recovery before manually, then they're okay to do that on their own. If not, then that's a particular service that either you or Commvault can provide them as well. There's Air Gap Protect, there's Clean Room Recovery, and then the last session we're going to talk about is Cloud Rewind. A really good guide to minimum viability on there. And then lastly, what I've included in here for you is some discovery questions. Ask these questions. They're quite bold. They go straight into what have you got? Have you experienced it? Do you realize what a pain it is to do it as well? Have you thought about what would happen if Active Directory goes down? And the last question in there is one that I mentioned in the last session. That's very much about minimum viability as a concept. So I'm just going to check the chat, check the questions to see if we've got any questions at all, which we haven't. So a couple of minutes over the advertised 45 minutes. That's everything. Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad you found that session useful. Checks in the post for that comment, mate. Thank you very much. If anyone has any follow-up questions at all, then please reach out to the Arrow team. You can reach out to Joel. You can reach out to Gary from a technical perspective, and you can also reach out to myself and Jose as well. David, I'm going to give you the Jerry Springer final thoughts slot. Anything from you, mate?
Not from me, no. Just to say, get my teeth in again. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Jose, for being part of this. It's been absolutely brilliant. There was actually, it's actually Joel has put a couple in there, which I thought, well, they might be a couple of questions that I can ask and just see where we're at. So I'll just read this out. Joel's put this in. It says, do you integrate with other Microsoft security management tools such as Sentinel, Defender, and Intune?
We do have integration with, from outside, from a SOAR, from a SEM perspective, we do integrate with a hell of a lot of security tools. And I know one of them is Sentinel. What I'll do is when I send out the slides for David for you to share, I'll put a link on there that goes into that into more depth. Good question, Joel. Good question, my friend.
Fantastic.
What was the other one?
You. The other one that we have is, how does Commvault support cross-region or multi-geo resilience for identity data?
That's a good question. Jose, what were your thoughts on that?
Sorry, for what data? For
multi-geo resilience for identity data.
So
how does Commvault support that?
For on-premises ID, you configure the location of the backup wherever you want. So the ideal is you have a copy on premises, and then you also replicate to the cloud. And the cloud could be any cloud, any region, anything you want. So it's really up to you to configure. For Entra ID, we actually configure the backups for you automatically. And we do that for Entra ID specifically, I think it's done in 3 different availability zones within Azure. So it's already available on 3 different availability zones within the UK, in the case of the UK. But it's going to depend on the specific region, how that works.
And it is worth calling out as well that with those 3 different availability zones, or where we're putting the data when we back it up, it is in an isolated environment, completely away from the Active Directory data. When you use native tools, you do not have that isolation. So you're literally putting all your eggs into one basket. So for me, it's worth doing a third-party backup anyway, just for having your backup in an isolated location, as well as all the other stuff that we talked about today. Okay, amazing. I think we can drop the mic, can't we?
Yeah, we're there. As I say, this is being recorded. It will hopefully be up on our YouTube channel a bit later on today. So I will share that link for you all to share with all your teams. So yeah, just say thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jose, for being part of this. Again, hopefully we'll see you all on the next one next month. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your time, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.